I am Gopika Jadeja, and I have recently completed a PhD at King's College in London and the National University of Singapore. My doctoral research was on Dalit poetry in Gujarat in Western India. At the National University of Singapore, I was with the South Asian Studies Department, and at King's College, I was with the India Institute. I also did my master's in South Asian studies with a focus on the literatures of South Asia. And I teach now at an international school in Singapore. You must be wondering why I'm giving all these personal details, but they're relevant to this talk. I'm going to speak about imagining South Asia and how it is possible only if we decolonize our intellectual traditions and curriculum. I will be drawing on my experience as a student in South Asian studies departments. Recently, there has been a lot of discussion amongst educators in international schools around the world about racism, diversity, inclusion, and decolonizing the curriculum. This has, of course, been in the light of the recent Black Lives Matter protests. Now, in higher education, this movement had come a little earlier in 2014 and 15 with the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa and Why My Curriculum is White movement in the UK. Since then, there has been a proliferation of interest in decolonization. And all of this has made me think about my own education as a child and uh, as a graduate student, about my graduate education in South Asian Studies department outside of South Asia. Now, there has been a discussion about, in academia, there has been discussion about the conceptualization of both South Asia and South Asian Studies departments in universities in what we call the West or the global North. Both of these are problematic, and so is the idea of the nation state and the categories of nation we recognize, that we recognize literatures and intellectual traditions by. But say Indian literature or Sri Lankan literature. But that is not what I want to talk about today. I choose to be or I chose to be part of South Asian studies departments for my graduate studies rather than English departments, both for my PhD and for my master's. I also did both of these degrees outside of South Asia. As a largely ignorant 21-year-old, all I knew was that I wanted to study South Asia and South Asian literatures. But I really did not know how to go about this. I had no framework. For my bachelor's, I studied Indian writing in English, and I'm sure that there are many similar courses in universities in South Asia, Sri Lankan writing in English or Pakistani writing in English. But I wanted to look further afield. I knew there was this beast called world literature, but I was interested in South Asia. I felt an affinity to the region. In fact, one of the highlights of my time while I was doing my master's was having my friends from India, from Pakistan, Bangladesh, from Malaysia and Indonesia in my kitchen eating my potato curry. Outside our countries, we were all together. We identified with each other. We identified with each other's cultures. And we drew strength from each other's experiences. Ironically, all of them had come to London, to the West, to study about their own region. Like, I could not find a course in India that would let me study South Asian literatures. I mean, Indian literatures, yes, but not South Asian. My friends also could not find courses that allowed them to study their own region in the country that they called home. It was only much later that I realized in the West, we studied our region, not really from our perspective or from the perspective that was Asian or South Asian, but from a Western perspective. which was still, even at a progressive university, a colonial perspective. And though the curriculum that we studied allowed for various perspectives, Eurocentrism, or even Anglo-American centrism, if you want to call it that, and androcentrism were biases that were very much present in the teaching. And the reason we had this kind of Eurocentric education is because the education systems in our countries had not conceptualized the region, South Asia or even Asia. They had not developed a framework that would allow us to study it from our own perspective. And this brings me back to decolonizing the curriculum. When I studied South Asian literatures, almost all the literature that we studied was written in English. We barely studied any text in translation. While I'm very aware that the domination of English creates linguistic hierarchies, English, I would say that English is also, and it acts as a bridge language, and reading literatures from various languages in the region in translation in English can be quite empowering, both for the writers, the translate, and the readers, and of course also the translators. Translation could be a powerful tool. It could allow for the proliferation of literature and scholarship in the region, in the languages of the region, which can be made accessible to the reader also then through English translation. So I would say there was a dearth of scholarship about the region that came from the region. The critics that we studied were either Western, or they were located in Western institutions. So of Indian origin or Pakistani origin, etc., but located in Western institutions. This per se does not negate their contribution. I just want to draw attention to the fact that even scholars from the region who we studied had the approval of Western institutions. While we studied the thought of Gandhi and Tagore, both easily available in English, where were the equivalent figures from the rest of South Asia? Where was the poetry and the intellectual thought of an Iqbal or a Qazi Nazrul Islam? The stories of Nepali writer I.B. Rai, or, other poetry from Bangladesh, Tamil writing from Sri Lanka. My real education in the region or of the region began only when I started traveling more within India to other parts of India and in Asia. I met writers and other intellectuals in my travels, and I learned from them. The question that arises is, why do we not engage with scholarship and literatures from South Asia in South Asia? What are the ways in which we can create this kind of engagement? The easy answer to the why question is, of course, that we have not really decolonized. As Professor Syed Farid Alatas says in an essay titled Silencing as Method, Southern academics who are interested in decolonization also overlook decolonial theory that has been produced in the global South. And this is very, very often the case in South Asia. We do not read and study the literatures and intellectual traditions of from the other countries in the region. So when we do not acknowledge the work of writers and intellectuals of the region in our curriculum, when we do not engage in India with ideas from Sri Lanka, or in Sri Lanka with ideas from India, and you can replace these names India and Sri Lanka with any country in the region, we are letting our minds remain captive. As a student, I want to learn, I want to be able to study the region from within. As a teacher, I want to be able to teach the literatures and the intellectual traditions of South Asia in South Asia, not as a view from the West. There are, of course, dangers. I'm quite aware to this kind of discourse. And I'm going to borrow from an article by Dr. Leon Musawi to highlight what I think are two such dangers. The first, as Musawi puts it, is that intellectual decolonization should not be essentialist or appropriate the global South. I will adapt this to South Asia and say that there's a danger that in conceptualizing South Asia, or if you were to broaden it, Asia, we essentialize the people, the ideas, the culture of the region as it was done during the time of colonization, the period of colonization. An example of this would be constructing a kind of singular idea of the region and then excluding marginalized voices, say excluding Dalit or tribal voices in teaching literatures from India. In fact, I think it is important also to draw connections between Dalit voices from across the region, Dalit voices from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. I would say it is important to draw these connections at various levels. Say when we trace the voices of women, can we trace a larger South Asian trajectory of literature and scholarship by women? What can we learn from this? Second, the second danger, and that is a very imminent danger, I think, in many countries in the region, is glorifying scholarship simply because it is from the region. Musawi calls this nativist decolonization. There's also, of course, the danger of tokenism. It is as important to be aware of these dangers as it is important that we begin to imagine South Asia from within Asia. Going back to the theme of migration and identity, there are many migrations of people and populations in South Asia, within South Asia. We have many shared cultural practices. We have our, can our ideas, our literatures and intellectual traditions then also migrate? If our people migrate, can our literatures and our intellectual traditions migrate? I'll end with this little memory that I have from my childhood. When I was a child, I thought that Ananda Kumar Swami was from India. Looking back, I think that is a happy mistake. Thank you.